Now, I watched the latest Broken Skull sessions. Got a couple of tweets about this. Steve Austin had Becky Lynch on as his latest guest. I thought it was very good. I thought it was a very good show. Becky is she's a fascinating person to listen to. Maybe it's the accent. I don't know. But it runs just shy of 90 minutes. She touches on the head injury that she sustained in 2006 that led to her taking 7 years off from wrestling before she ended up in NXT. She had left Ireland to wrestle all over the place. She went to go live in Vancouver, so she was wrestling in Canada. She traveled to Japan, to Germany. You know, this woman just wanted to travel the world and wrestle. She was 19 years old at the time. She was in Germany, and what happened is she gave somebody a suplex, and the girl landed on Becky's head on the way down. She said the girl wasn't too good. She wasn't very good, but she blamed herself for complicating things. She had just got done with a tour of Japan, and so she wanted to get her shit in. She wanted to try all these moves that she learned over there, and she ended up giving herself a bad concussion. And it was a little more serious than that, so let me fill in the gaps here that she didn't talk about on the show. She was wrestling this girl named Kisu. Is this woman's name. I have no idea if Kisu is still wrestling or not. But she was wrestling her for German Stampede Wrestling. This was in 2006. And what she did is she delivered a German suplex, right? A German suplex in Germany. Who knew? Who knew? I guess it makes sense. She gives her a German suplex, and you can see Kisu landed on Becky's face. Becky comes up. She's grabbing her head. But she kept wrestling like nothing was wrong. I mean, they wrestled for a few more minutes, and Becky looked fine. I mean, the move itself didn't look particularly devastating or anything like that. And this other girl, I mean, she wasn't that big, so it's not like this 500-pound woman landed on her head or anything like that. But she ended up in and out of the hospital for weeks after that because she started getting these really intense headaches. She had a loud buzzing in her ear that wouldn't go away. The vision in her left eye was completely blurred. Her doctor told her that she may have damaged her 8th cranial nerve. And that alone is not what caused her to leave wrestling for 7 years. I mean, it was a bad injury. It wasn't that bad. There were other things involved in why she stepped away. She said in the interview with Austin that she used the concussion as an excuse to get out of wrestling because she just thought she was a failure. And she was depressed, and she just didn't think that she was good enough, and she wasn't doing well. And she talked about going into all of these other, jobs. She became a flight attendant. She was a personal trainer. She was an English teacher. She took college courses in acting. All of these things that she started doing to try to fill the void that was left by wrestling. And it was a conversation with Finn Balor. It was a conversation with Fergal, as she called him, that really turned her around on things. Now, Devitt, Balor, is the person who trained her. He trained her. Now, he was still a young guy himself, but he knew enough about the basics where he had a school and he was training people, and Becky Lynch is one of the people that he helped train. So she went back to him and said, well, I'm kind of thinking about dipping my toe back into things and maybe getting back into it. And she said, Balor's response was very simple. He told her, go back, because I don't want to be sitting here with you 10 years from now having this same conversation. She said this year, 2022, marks 10 years since they had that conversation. And look where she is now. She headlined a WrestleMania before he did. She talked about the triple threat match at WrestleMania 32. She said she wasn't originally supposed to even be part of that match. It was supposed to be Charlotte Flair one-on-one against Sasha Banks. But there were some injuries at the time. She was filling in on TV doing stuff that they ended up really liking. And so they worked her into the match. She said it was the fans chanting her name when they debuted the Smackdown Women's Championship. I remember they did a segment, I think, with all the women on that roster in the ring. And they were chanting her name. That's what got them to realize she's the one. And they put the championship on her, made her the first SmackDown Women's Champion when she beat Carmella for the belt. SummerSlam 2018. I was glad to hear her, talk about this, and they showed what happened there. That was the triple threat. It was Charlotte, it was Becky, it was Carmella for the championship. And I remember that vividly. I remember talking about that for months. on the podcast. Not too many people were talking about the momentum that Becky Lynch was building. And I remember pointing out on the podcast week after week when she finally started winning matches, because they were doing nothing with her. She was barely even being on TV featured. And then she started winning matches. Week after week, she was racking up wins in a very low-key way. The announcers weren't really drawing too much attention to it, but I was pointing it out every week on the podcast. I said, look, they're doing something with her. They're building to something with Becky Lynch because she keeps winning. And the fans were really behind her, and they really wanted to see her win the championship. Charlotte had been out, I think, for a month or a month and a half. I think she might have popped a boob or something. I don't remember what the injury was, but she was out for a little while. And when she got that repaired, she returned to television. And almost instantly, she might have won, I think, one match on TV. And all of a sudden, they inserted her into the championship picture heading into SummerSlam. Even though she had not even been on television. She wasn't doing anything. She returns and then boom, Charlotte Flair is in the title picture. Even though they had this great story that had been building with Becky and the people wanting to see her win. So it turned into a triple threat. And not the last time that Charlotte would be shoehorned into a Becky Lynch match. Let me just mention that. But she said there were people in the office who actually thought that she would be booed for what she did to Charlotte when that match was over, when she attacked her, which is very scary because it should have been obvious to anybody following that story for her that summer that Charlotte winning was going to cause a massive backlash against Charlotte. And it's exactly what happened. They rooted for Becky and they booed Charlotte. They were not happy about that finish. And it wasn't just in that one city. How they didn't see that is bizarre to me. I mean, this is what they do for a living, right? Isn't this what they do? The creative forces over in WWE, right? They tell stories. How is it that I knew what the reaction was going to be and Becky knew what the reaction was going to be, but they didn't know what the reaction was going to be? But that was a great moment. When that actually the match itself I remember being pretty good, but that moment when she smacked Charlotte after she hugged her, she then hauled off and smacked her in the face. And the place just exploded. And they went nuts and they did yes chants. They were so happy. And that was the beginning of the man. That was the beginning of what was supposed to be a heel turn for Becky Lynch. Boy, they're always trying to turn this woman heel. But that was the beginning of the supposed heel turn. And they tried and it didn't work because the people didn't want to boo her. They showed Nia Jax potatoing her on Raw that November. Austin was very happy that Becky did not wipe all the blood off of her face, or else we would have been deprived of that iconic image of her posing in the crowd all bloody with her arms outstretched. I mean, that was a classic moment on Raw. But there were some other interesting things here. They talked about the difference in chasing and staying on top. And Becky said that was when the pressure really started to get to her. After she won at WrestleMania against Ronda and Charlotte, and now she's Becky 2 belts and she's on top and she's number one. She went from main events with Ronda Rousey and Charlotte Flair to trying to make Lacey Evans. And Austin made a great point. He goes, that should not have been your job. And she said, well, no, it shouldn't be my job, but it was. So I had to do the best I could with it because Lacey wasn't ready for that spot. And she was somebody that people didn't know. And she's being thrust into this position challenging for the title. And Becky said, well, basically she had to just make the most of it. But they talked about WrestleMania 36. And I've heard her say this before, that she pitched to lose her Raw Women's title at WrestleMania that year. She pitched it. She didn't say in the interview here what the idea was that she pitched, but she said before that she pitched to lose to Shayna Baszler, who was her opponent, and the idea was rejected. Now, this would have been before she even knew that she was pregnant, or I guess she might have been pregnant at that point and just didn't know it, but this was before any of that, right before. And she was like, well, I feel like I should lose to this woman. It would help Shayna a lot more. And for the company, it would have worked out well because little did they know that they were about to lose this woman for, at least 9 months. But the idea got rejected. And that led to the segment on Raw with her forfeiting the title over to Asuka. And she said, look, honestly, the fact that I had to disappear for all those months, what made it a little bit easier was the fact that it just so happened to coincide with COVID. and she didn't have to work in front of no crowd. And you could tell when Austin talks about this, I mean, he would have been fucking miserable. Back in the day, if there was a fucking pandemic that hit and they had to work in front of no fans, Austin would have been miserable. Can you imagine Austin and those guys back then, but especially him, as hot as he was when he would walk out in front of those crowds, if a pandemic had hit back then and they were still doing shows in front of empty chairs, and Austin is storming down to the ring with his BMF, like, how awful would that have been? That would have been terrible. So I didn't envy any of those people having to do that. Some of them, they pulled it off. Some of them worked well on those pandemic shows. But you could tell Austin, they brought him in that first week, actually. It was supposed to be 316 Day. They were going to do a whole 316 Day thing with Steve Austin. And instead, he comes walking out. There it is right there. You want to know what it would have been like? Go back and watch that show. It was fucking awful. Him coming to the ring. They had, him reciting some awful material. There wasn't anybody there to laugh or react to it or anything. And he has said that it was awful. He hated it. He hated that segment. He thought it came off so bad. And it did. And Becky cracked a joke. She said, the goal was always to have a family. She said, 316 Day, because her having a kid, she wasn't expecting it to happen that fast. Seth has got some swimmers in there. She said, I don't know. We had 316 Day. Remember, she was in the ring drinking with Austin? She goes, it was 316 Day, and I got drunk, and 9 months later, I had a baby. It's funny how that works. And she does talk about coming back at SummerSlam and the stuff with Bianca, the 26-second match. She only found out that day. She confirmed that she only found out that day about the plan to bring her back, and it was their choice. It was not hers. It was their idea for her to come back as a heel. There were conflicting reports early on about, Becky wanted to turn heel. No, it was the company that wanted her to turn heel. But the most interesting thing I think that people will take away from this, they do address the infamous segment on Smackdown a few months ago, the title swap with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. They replayed the entire thing while they sat there and watched it. Charlotte is in the ring with Becky. Sonya Deville is between them. This was their great idea because post-draft, right, they're going to swap the belts like it's fucking candy. It was a terrible idea to begin with. These segments are so stupid when they do this. They did this with the tag titles, with the New Day a few years ago. It's stupid. It's very dumb. But they're in the ring. Charlotte is holding the belt away from Becky when Becky goes to reach for it. Charlotte kind of holds it away from her and, it falls on the floor, and then Becky takes her title and throws it at Charlotte. And Becky said, look, this should have been an easy, straightforward thing. The plan was, I'm going to grab the title out of her hand, and for a few seconds, I'm going to be Becky Two Belts. I'm going to have both belts, and then I'm going to take my title, and I'm going to throw it at Charlotte. And Sonya would make her pick the belt up. I don't know if Sonya would make her pick the belt up or Charlotte would make Sonya pick it up. I think it's whichever way it was. But Charlotte would then challenge Becky to a fight. Like, bitch, you want to go? And then Becky would back away and say, you know what? Not tonight. So the idea is that everybody would have their moment. Becky would have her moment. Charlotte would have her moment. And Becky said she knew. She knew when they were in the back, before they even went out there. She didn't say how she knew or what made her think this, but she said she knew that Charlotte was not going to, she was going to go into business for herself. She knew that Charlotte was going to do what she ended up doing before they even went out there. And she tried to tell people, but she was powerless to do anything about it. And then they went out there and it played out exactly the way that she thought it would. So I don't know if they had some kind of a disagreement in the back before the show and Charlotte flat out told her, no, here's how we're doing it. And that's how she knew, or what. It's very clear that these two are not friends anymore. This is not a work. They're not working the fans. It didn't feel like one then, and it definitely doesn't feel like one now. I don't even see what purpose it would serve. Something happened between these two, or they just grew apart, whatever it was. These two are nowhere near as close as they used to be. And you could just hear it in her voice as she talked about this. And when the segment was over, she admitted, she said, I lost my head. I got hot. Words were said. Words were exchanged. Things got heated in the back when it was over. It was what it was. Remember the whole story that, it was all over at PW Insider and all the websites. They had security escort Charlotte out of the building. That's when Andrade went on Twitter and tweeted something out about WWE. I think he said, fuck WWE or something. And it's like, that came out of nowhere. That was kind of strange. So anyway, she gets into a whole discussion about that. And they worked together. They did business together at Survivor Series and had an excellent match. And she says she still has a close bond with Bayley and Sasha. Not so much anymore with Charlotte. They don't really like each other. And Austin put all 4 of them over as future Hall of Famers, which is pretty obvious. One day they will all go into the Hall of Fame. A lot of people on the roster these days will end up in the Hall of Fame eventually. But those 4 women will deservedly be inducted one day when it's their time. So again, it was a 90-minute interview. They got into a lot of other stuff. It was very interesting. I enjoyed it, and I think you will too.